Welcome to Glory Days. I'm Nick Brooks and today we're going to be talking football. In 1997, the Champions League final brought together two very different sides. Juventus were the best team in the world, bar none. They'd won the Champions League in 96 and eased to the Serie A title in 97, losing just 3 times. They were the sort of side that left love-struck fans in their wake, that rare outfit that combines a rock-solid defence with an imaginative, inspiring attack. Marcello Lippi, often found on the touchline with a cigar resting between his lips, seemed as much mob boss as manager. Yet he was without doubt one of football's finest brains. And what a cast of players he had to work with. Angelo Peruzzi was a keeper good enough to rival Buffon. Ferrara and Montero were a dominant pairing at the back. Deschamps a driving force at the base of midfield. And they had so much going forward: Vieri, Boksic and Jugovic, Amoruso, Delivio and Del Piero. And arguably the most talented player in all of football, the man from Marseille, Zinedine Zidane. It's hard to keep track of all that Juve achieved through the course of the season. They cruised through their Champions League group, conceding just 1 goal. They claimed the Intercontinental Cup and eased to the Super Cup too. In April, they went to the San Siro and hammered AC 6-1, a moment seen as the passing of the torch in Italian football. Quite simply, no one could get close to them. Gary Neville described them as unbelievably good, big and powerful and packed with talent. United had travelled to Turin in September 96 and been blown away, battered and bruised and sent home without managing a shot. Just standing in the tunnel next to them was intimidating, Neville wrote. I'd never faced such a formidable team. Lacking the budget for their own Zidane, Borussia Dortmund had picked up Paul Lambert on a free transfer at the start of the season, after the ex-Motherwell man impressed on trial. Sure, they lacked the star power and the fear factor which Juve had in droves, but they'd nonetheless been on a serious journey since the start of the 90s. A 10th place league finish in 1991 led to an overhaul. New manager Ottmar Hitzfeld had carried the club to steepling new heights. Heading into 96, they won back-to-back Bundesliga titles, disrupting Bayern's supremacy. Still, no German side had made it to the European final in a decade. And for much of the year, it looked like third time unlucky for the German champions. They lost 9 games in the Bundesliga, including a 4-0 humbling at the hands of Werder Bremen. In the first round of the Cup, they were beaten by a third division side, and they couldn't even top their Champions League group. In the eyes of many, it was a miracle they made it to the final at all. They'd beaten Auxerre easily enough in the quarters, but the semi-final against Man United was a different story altogether. Across the course of 180 minutes, Ferguson's men spurned chance after glorious chance, unable to find the back of the net. Dortmund, on the other hand, took what came their way. United was shell-shocked, but sometimes football seems written in the stars. There was a sense of destiny, of predestination about Dortmund's run in the first months of 1997. But naturally, when it came to the final, no one gave them a hope in hell. Most had already anointed Juventus as back-to-back winners, a feat which hadn't been managed since the Champions League was formed in 1992. We were absolutely the underdogs, Karl-Heinz Riedler said in hindsight, yet Dortmund seemed undaunted by the scale of the task. They deserve huge credit for keeping faith. In the build-up to the final, Hitzfeld showed his men footage of Juve's destruction of Ajax. They could easily have been intimidated. The Dutch champions were one of the era's best sides, yet they were swept aside as Juve produced some spellbinding football. Zidane pulled the strings like a fairground puppeteer. In hindsight, he felt it was the best game he ever played. Lambert reckoned you didn't have to be Einstein to realise he was the #1 player in world football. Some of the squad probably felt they, didn't need the video session. Dortmund and Juve had never met on the field before May 93, yet a strange twist of fate had seen the two clash 6 times in the last 4 years. The rivalry had been a little one-sided. Juventus blew Dortmund away in the 93 UEFA Cup final and won 4 of the 5 first meetings. But finally, in November 95, the German club got the better of their new Italian rivals. It was a glimmer of hope they could cling on to ahead of the final. And at least Juventus were, to some extent, a known quantity. 5 players in Dortmund's squad had once worn Juve's black and white jerseys, and after so many clashes, the 2 sets of fans felt like old friends. Apparently they mingled happily in downtown Munich before the final, drinking beer, often wearing each other's kits. Journalist and Dortmund fan Uli Hess remembers it having the feel of a semi-annual family reunion. Dortmund travelled down to Munich the day before the match. Come game day, the tension was palpable. There was pin-drop silence on the bus to the stadium. When they arrived at the ground an hour and a half before kickoff, the stands were already packed full of fans. The players had to walk around the running track to reach the changing rooms and heard the orchestra practicing the iconic Champions League anthem. It was a scene that would have sent shivers down any footballer's spine. Some of the players were struck by the size of Zidane. Standing at 6'1", he seemed equal parts bouncer and ballerina. Others noticed that Angelo Di Livio had 3-1 scrawled on his hand, an eerily prophetic prediction. But Dortmund weren't about to lie down and let Juve walk all over them. They had a plan, setting up with defensive stability in mind. Lambert and Sousa would act as the defensive midfield axis, sitting deep in front of three centre-backs. For the Scottish midfielder, it's hard to imagine the magnitude of the occasion. A year earlier, he'd been on £500 a week. When he arrived in Germany, he'd expected to spend most of the season sat on the bench and had vowed to soak up as much information as possible. Yet here he was, in a Champions League final, tasked with the biggest job of all, sticking like glue to Zinedine Zidane. For their part, Juventus had enough attacking options to leave Del Piero on the bench. Was there a strain of thought in the back of their minds that just turning up might be enough? It's impossible to say, and if there was any complacency, it certainly wasn't evident in the early showings. Playing in their away Royal Blue strip, Juve came out looking like $1 million. In the first minutes, Jugovic was bundled over in the middle of the box. It looked a stonewall penalty, but the ref remained unmoved. Was this the first sign that it might just be Dortmund's night? If so, they'd have to absorb more pressure. Juventus surged forward, threatening to drown their opponents under wave after wave of liquid attacking football. But Dortmund were built to absorb, and on the stroke of half an hour they got up the pitch and won a corner. Peruzzi came off his line and flapped like a fish out of water, punching the ball straight to Lambert on the opposite flank. The Scot floated a diagonal ball towards the back post. It bounced around and Riedler reacted first, slamming it into the back of the net. Elegant it wasn't, but Dortmund were 1-0 up. Hitzfeld, standing cool on the touchline in a camel-coloured trench coat, pumped his fist like he expected nothing less. 5 minutes later, Dortmund broke again and won another corner. A pinpoint cross found Riedler in the centre of the box. He rifled a header into the top left corner. Lucky number 13 had changed the final in a flash. Dortmund were in dreamland. This time Hitzfeld didn't even celebrate. Maybe he was conscious of how long they had to survive. Before the half was out, Zidane had struck the post with a low drive, and Juve had a goal disallowed thanks to a harsh handball call. They trudged back to the changing room, well aware they dominated every facet of the game bar the goals column. But they'd keep banging on the door. Lippi turned to Del Piero at half-time. Dortmund's keeper Stefan Klos rarely found a moment's rest. Yet every minute that ticked by without a goal was a win for the German team. Juve pressed and pressed, yet the hour mark came and went and they still hadn't troubled the scorers. Only then, they produced the most outrageous piece of football, the sort of goal that's so incisively brilliant, so fluid and seemingly effortless, that it can only be scored by the very best sides. They moved the ball quickly from inside their own half. On the wing, Boksic pivoted, evaded a challenge and found Zidane. He immediately swept a pass forward to Vieri on the edge of the box, but the striker had the imagination to step over the ball and leave it for Boksic, charging towards the byline. That single piece of brilliance carved Dortmund's centre-backs to ribbons. Yet there was still much to be done. Boksic's first touch was heavy, and he had to race to keep the ball in play. With his second, he cut it back towards the near post to Del Piero, arriving from nowhere, eyes towards the corner flag. Without as much as a glimpse at goal, he backheeled the ball past the keeper. Del Piero wheeled away with a look of steely determination on his face. He slapped palms and egged his team on. You got the sense that Juve were on the charge. For the Dortmund fans, the tension must have been unbearable. The best team in the world were coming at their men, who still had half an hour to cling on. And now Juve were thinking all-out attack. Sat on the bench, 20-year-old Lars Ricken noticed that even keeper Angelo Peruzzi was standing well off his line. He was introduced 5 minutes after Del Piero's goal, instructed to wait for an outball, which might never arrive. Only it ended up coming instantly. Dortmund stole the ball off the overcommitted Juventus. Sousa found Moller in the centre circle, who played a first-time through ball for Ricken to run onto. 2 passes, and Juve's defence was split open. What was going through Ricken's head as he ran onto that pass? He was a good 40 yards out, well to the right of the goal, yet there was no moment of indecision. With his first touch in the Champions League final, he sent the ball swirling high into the night sky. Peruzzi was left stranded in no man's land. The ball arced over his head, drooping into the net. Lars Ricken had been on the pitch for 16 seconds and had secured the Champions League for Dortmund. In the process, he'd become the youngest scorer in the tournament's final and sapped the fight out of Juventus. The crowd went wild as the ref blew the final whistle. In the stands, flares burned and flags fluttered in the sky. On the pitch, players piled on top of each other in ecstasy. In the eyes of many, they'd done the impossible. When they returned home, there were 600,000 rapturous fans waiting for them. Lars Ricken never quite managed to replicate the heights he hit that night in Munich. His career was scuppered by injuries. By the time he was 30, he was playing for Dortmund's reserve. But his goal's part of football folklore. Still today, people meet him and ask about the night when he swaggered onto the stage of a Champions League final and chipped the keeper with his first touch of the ball. For Paul Lambert too, this was an incredibly special evening. 6 months earlier, few football fans had known his name, yet he'd just won man of the match in the biggest game of all, become the first Brit to win the Champions League and utterly stifled the mighty Zinedine Zidane. Of course, he remains a legend in Dortmund. He was at the club less than a year and a half, yet few players have made such an immense contribution. Just recently, he went back and stood with fans in the yellow wall. Needless to say, they went absolutely wild. For Juve's fans and players, the manner in which the trophy slipped through their fingers must still rankle. They were back for their 3rd straight final in 1998, yet were outdone again, this time by Real Madrid. Since that famous night in Munich, they've won 14 league titles, yet in Europe it's been a case of often the bridesmaid, never the bride. Juventus were runners-up in 2003, in 2015 and in 2017. Given the way football's landscape has shifted, when they next return to the showpiece, they'll likely do so as outsiders. We've seen so many great finals since, but didn't 97 have it all? Great goals, flowing football, and a true underdog story. But where does it sit in the great pantheon of Champions League moments? Drop me a line and tell me your thoughts.